Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm finally ready to do my full review on the Viper Voxnaes Katla. This is a super interesting knife. It was loaned to me for review by my buddy Brandon at Everyday Minimalist. I'm going to link to his channel down below. I'll also link to his Instagram and his TikTok. He is one of the few EDC guys on TikTok who's actually trying. I've always found that TikTok is virtually impossible to do for knives. As the second you put a knife video up, they pull it down. But Brandon has found a way to exist there, and he is like the biggest EDC dude on TikTok. Really, really cool that he's leading the charge there, because I don't want to do it. His YouTube channel is phenomenal as well. Amazing gear reviews. And he's become a buddy at this point. So I loaned him a couple of knives. He's loaned me a couple. I'm sure we'll loan each other more in the future. But this is one of the ones that he loaned me that I really wanted to check out. In fact, he just did a video calling this one of his top 5 knives of 2020. And he didn't have it for that video. He had to use old B-roll of it because it was still in my possession, which I feel a little bad about. But anyway, this is going to be my full review of the Katla. And Brandon will be linked down below. So this knife is intriguing for a couple of reasons. The biggest one is that I had no idea it existed. It's not like I know everything about the EDC world and all the knives that come out and all that. There's still a lot that I'm learning and figuring out, and I miss things all the time. But I feel like I've got a pretty good pulse on the knives that Jesper Voxnaes is coming out with. I really like his designs. I follow like Giant Mouse pretty closely, and I feel like he works with Fox and Viper and a number of companies quite a bit. And this one just slipped right by me. And I only really started learning about it because a couple of my buddies got them and started talking about them and saying really good things about them. And so I mentioned this before. I was planning on buying one. The version I was going to get, which is this version, wasn't in stock when I was looking, and then Brandon offered to loan me his. So I appreciate that. And I've been really excited to check it out, and now that it's been in my possession for a couple of weeks, I've had a lot of fun carrying it, feeling it out, using it a little bit, and Brandon was really cool about that. This is a user keeper for him, so he's willing to let me cut with it, carry it, and all that fun stuff, which I greatly prefer. If I'm going to take a loaner to review, I'm usually pretty adamant that it's got to be cool with the owner that I carry it and use it to an extent. I'm not going to ruin anybody's knife, but there are some loaners I take that I'm just curious enough about that even though I'm not going to cut with them, I'm willing to check them out, like the Swish Buoy. Anyway, very cool of Brandon to let me borrow this, use it, and carry it. So this knife is built by Viper, obviously. It is the Viper Katla, and you can see up here on the blade we've got the Viper branding. In fact, it says Katla Viper, made in Maniago, Italy. So that's what's stamped on this side. And then on the other side, you'll see we've got the Vox logo and M390. So I really like Vox designs. I find in general they agree with my hand, and I like the way that they function. And alright, so as I was saying, blade steel is M390, and we've got a Tanto point on it, which I think looks really cool. You can see it is just a little bit of a compound grind, although it's not dramatic at all. In fact, I don't know, maybe that's even just like a transition. It doesn't feel like it's a different thickness up here. Anyways, interesting blade shape, really cool looking swedge that I think definitely adds some flair to it, and will probably make that tip a little more effective at piercing as well. So very nice. Got some fine jimping up there on the blade. And then we've got micarta handle scales. We have a pivot collar, which is done, I think, in brass. And then we've got a backspacer back here that I believe is copper. I feel like maybe even someone told me, or I did ask, and now I forget. I think it's copper based on the way that it's patinaing. And I think it does look cool. It's a good looking backspacer. Got a little bit of jimping on there as well. Doubles as a lanyard hole, which I couldn't care less about, but some people I'm sure want that. We have a loop over style deep carry clip. My pet peeve exists here, where it's a deep carry clip that doesn't come to the butt end of the knife. You have still that much knife sticking out, which isn't like an insane amount of knife, but I just feel like if you're going to put a deep carry clip on it, have it go all the way deep. That's my thing. Yeah, internally we've got liners which are nested into the micarta. If you look in there, hopefully that'll show up. See, it's obviously a liner lock. Both sides have full liners. They are nested in there really well, and lock bar access is good. It's nice. So, steel liners, M390 blade, micarta. I would guess that this clip is titanium. The hardware might be as well. Copper backspacer, I think. And maybe these pivot collars are copper as well, because they do seem to kind of match it. But they seem a little light for copper. Maybe they're brass. Maybe it's brass and the brass is patinaing. I don't know. It's got a backspacer. So yeah, thumb studs and flipper for deployment, which is pretty cool. And I think that's about it on construction. So let's talk about kind of my typical talking points and where I've come to on this knife after using it quite a bit. So I guess before I do that, let's talk about how much I've carried and used it. I've had this knife for a few weeks in my possession now. I haven't carried it every single day, obviously, because I'm working on reviewing a lot of stuff. And I'm just kind of finally getting to a spot where I'm a little bit back to normal, thankfully. But I've carried this probably 10 times. And I've used it pretty extensively for most of my typical, if not all of my typical EDC type stuff. Even last night I was DMing with Alex from Alex the Knife Box. I don't know what video he's working on, but he was like, name your top 5 EDC cutting tasks that you actually do. And I named them, and he was like, all right, is it okay if I use these in a video? And I was like, sure, yeah, I don't care, I just told you, it's no secret. Anyway, so he's up to something, but the top 5 EDC tasks for me would be opening packages. That's probably the number one thing that I do with knives. It's probably the number one thing a lot of people do with their knives in 2021. Opening Amazon, etc. boxes. The next highest thing would probably be like cutting like internal portions of packaging. Like if I'm unboxing like toys and stuff that have little like attachment points inside, or like electronics, like there's little things in packages, or like clamshell packaging, cutting open that kind of stuff. So like opening packaging would be another one. Zip ties are a big one for me, partially because a lot of them are like in packaging and stuff. And then I also, frankly, I just kind of like to test on zip ties. So sometimes I'll even literally just like put zip ties on something and pop them with a knife to see how it performs. Another one would be like cutting apples or miscellaneous fruit for my kid or for myself, especially if we're out and about. Like I enjoy bringing my daughter out on little hikes with me and stuff, and so I don't want to like peel an apple at home and slice it and put it in a baggie. I'd rather just toss a whole apple in my backpack, and she won't eat the peel on apples, and she needs it sliced. So like I use knives to slice apples, and inherently at home, if I've got a knife on me that I feel is going to do a fair job at it, I'll just use the knife that's on me, because I'm always trying to test my knives, so I'm looking for ways to use them. So cut a lot of apples and that type of stuff. And then there's like crafty things, like if my daughter's doing a craft or my wife needs help with something and I'm like cutting paper, or I'm making labels and I printed them out, like I'm cutting the label out of the sheet of paper, or like that kind of stuff. All of those types of things I've done with this knife. Oh, the other big one, probably actually number 2 in that list, would be processing cardboard for the dumpster. Because I don't do that more than I open packages, but I do it basically the same amount. The only difference is that some of the packages are small enough that I just toss them right in the dumpster, but any like big box that we get, I cut the cardboard into reasonable sheets so that they can go into the dumpster in kind of a flat, smaller way, and I'm not an a-hole neighbor to the people who share the dumpster. So there's that. I've done all those things with this. I have cut plenty of cardboard, I've opened plenty of boxes, I've cut a couple of apples at this point. Like, I've done all of my things with it. And it's done really well for all of them. This is not a knife that I feel is like, I look at as a very outdoorsy knife. I feel like I kind of categorize knives loosely into like regular EDC and then like outdoor EDC, right? This knife has been in my pocket on a couple of hikes, and it hasn't felt like it's less than capable per se, because like I have my fixed blade on me, so my folder doesn't have to be crazy, but it's nothing like what I would consider an adventure knife, being knives like the Demco 8020 or like the Spyderco Shaman, which just seem a little bit more like heftier. This knife isn't dainty, but it's not like hefty either. So let's talk about ergos now that I've talked about all that. We'll jump in there. Ergonomically, this knife is pretty good for me. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. I think it's it's close to being perfect, and it probably could get there with a couple of little tweaks. But the micarta, in terms of its general texture, feels very good to me. My gripe with it on this knife a little bit is that the corners, both up here and down here, are a little bit harsh. If these were rounded some more, this knife would feel buttery smooth in hand, because in general the profile, the shape of the knife is very good. The way that the kind of choil up here and the following lines are cut, it fits my hand really well. But especially on this corner, where it's kind of where my fingers are like grasping in against it right here, I just feel that edge a lot. And then up on this back corner as well, the way it sits in my palm, it's not a hot spot. It's not like, ooh, this is sharp, it's trying to cut me with its handle. It's not bad. But if they rounded it, oh man, it would be excellent for my hands. Especially this spot down here. That's the biggest offender. But yeah, up here we've got kind of a somewhat usable forward choil. Come on. It's not like a full finger choil. I mean, I can get there, but I feel like I'm dancing with that edge a little bit. I find I more often just kind of put my fingertip there for like precise little cuts. I can do kind of detail work with it, but I'm not like choking up in a hammer grip up there or anything. I just feel like I'm too close to that edge for comfort. But yeah, feels really good in a hammer grip in the primary position, other than that spot on the micarta that's a little bit, it's not even sharp, it's just angular for me. Saber grip also, I like the jimping. I do wish, like on giant mouse knives and a lot of other Voxnaes designs, that the jimping was a little forward. I love when he does that. But this spine is crowned a little, so it is comfortable to put my thumb on up in front of the jimping. His jimping is one of those rare cases where I like jimping. It's nice and like fine. It's tightly spaced. It's not too deep. It feels good. So I wish it was a little further forward, but not a deal breaker by any means. In reverse grip, this knife is really good. I like it a lot in reverse grip. The edges and angles on the micarta are still kind of the one thing that's not super comfortable, but I like that I've got a good spot to place my thumb back here. That feels nice. It's good. Reverse grip jaw cut, not very good, but you could, if you needed to, use it like that for a minute. Forward grip jaw cut, pretty decent actually. That feels pretty good. So ergonomically, call it pretty good. It's not like a huge win, but it's not a big bummer either. Like, it's very workable. It's usable. So ergos are pretty good. Let's talk. All right. So now that those people have passed by, the next thing I should talk about is probably action. The action on this knife is very good. This knife does run on bearings. Double checking so I don't make myself look like an idiot. It's snappy. It's got a good detent on it. I feel like Viper knives in general, based on my experience, which hasn't been a ton, but has been enough, sometimes their detents feel a little light for me. This one, that's not the case. If I do like what I'm going to call the left EDC test, where I just barely get enough pressure on here to get it to break and no more, it does, as you can see, fail. But I gotta try to do that. When I just kind of light switch it or push button it, in general it works fine. So if you're left EDC, that might bother you, but I find it's pretty good. And then the plus side to that as well, let me do the same test but on a thumb stud, because I feel like this might be a better result. Yeah. So, I got it to fail. It's harder to get it to fail on that. I feel like dialing a detent to be good with thumb studs and a flipper tab is different than dialing it for just one or the other, because on thumb studs, I feel like you don't usually need as firm of a detent as you do with a flipper tab, depending on how the flipper tab is placed and all that. Alright, sorry about that. Apparently it's a fairly busy day in the canyon here. So, as I was saying, I think I was talking about left EDC's test and how detents can be a little bit different when you're tuning them just for a flipper, just for thumb studs, just for hole opening. They need a different amount of pressure depending on where you're pushing on it and what the angles are and all that. So the fact that this one to me feels very good and smooth and pretty snappy, and in both ways, both for the thumb studs, whether I'm middle finger flicking it, oh that was bad, middle finger flicking it, thumb flicking it, or using the flipper tab. It's nice that it works in each way and that it feels balanced between them, and it's a good detent in my opinion. So the action is fun. In terms of how it drops, it's not quite like free droppy, but it's pretty close, and it feels nice and smooth and kind of controlled the whole way. I like it. It's a fun knife to fidget with, and the fact that I've got multiple deployment methods is a big plus for me. I like that. I find it fun when I can deploy a knife multiple ways, because I like to fidget with knives. And you might be sitting there, and maybe you're a crusty old guy who's like, well, knives aren't for fidgeting. I don't care. I like to do it. I also use knives as tools all the time. I get both sides of it. It is fun for me to fidget with knives, and it adds value for me. So I like that this one is good at that. Other than action, and what else do we talk about? Ergos. We need to talk about carry. So, as I already mentioned, I find it to be objectively a flaw on any knife. No one is safe from this. When a deep carry loop over style clip is used, and you still have more than like a millimeter of knife sticking out of your pocket. Why? Why use a deep carry clip then? Just don't. I mean, I guess compared to mounting a clip in the same exact spot that wasn't loop over style, it does carry deeper than that would. But it's not deep carry like this. It just has a loop over clip. And so maybe that's what I just need to describe it as. There's loop over clips, and then there's deep carry clips. This is a loop over clip, not a deep carry clip. A lot of knives do that. Knives that I love do that. So it's not like it ruins a knife for me carry-wise. It's not the end of the world if I have some knife sticking out of my pocket, but it's my preference. And I just would like, if people are going through the trouble of putting a loop over style carry clip on anyways, why not make it go deep? Go to the butt end of the knife so the knife disappears in your pocket. That would be preferable to me. That said, this clip has good retention. I haven't had any issues with the way this clip functions in terms of how well it holds the knife in pocket. It slips in and out easily because this micarta isn't overly rough. It's not shredding my pockets. It's a well-dialed clip in terms of those aspects. I've carried this knife as a primary almost every time. I think I tried it as a secondary once. It's a little big for me to be a secondary. I think the time I carried it as a secondary, I had like the Demco 8020 as a primary. So it was like, it's a little smaller than that, sure. It's in comparison, it's small, but it's carried quite well, considering its size and proportions. It's comfortable in pocket. It is a little bit kind of blocky. Like I said, these edges of the micarta aren't super rounded, so I guess if it were more kind of rounded over, I think it would get a little bit more comfortable, not just in hand, but in pocket. But in general, I found it to be a comfortable knife to carry. It's not ultra lightweight. I don't think it's trying to be. It's just kind of average-ish in pocket, but there's no problems with it. There's nothing about it in pocket that like bothers me in terms of how it actually feels. My one gripe, obviously, is placement of the clip. I'd like to just see it moved to the butt end of the knife. But yeah, it carries fine. In terms of cutting performance, I already talked about this a little bit when I went over all the cutting tasks, but this blade has done really well for all the cutting tasks that I've done. Has it been the best at any of them? No. This is not the thinnest, sliciest blade, and for the types of tasks I do with a knife in this category, the kind of thinner and the slicier, the better. But, to be fair, I think this knife is probably, like if you really look at it, I think it is trying to be somewhat outdoorsy. Obviously this version is micarta, so it seems especially outdoorsy, but they make these in like full titanium, and there's other options as well. I think there might even be G10 ones. But the nature of the knife seems like it's kind of blending between like heavy-duty EDC, like knife you can rely on for anything in an urban environment, to like day hike knife. And I think that's fair. And I think because I kind of put it in that category, I understand that it's not trying to be the thinnest, sliciest little thing. Like, it's a decent thickness on the blade stock. Not overly thick. I've certainly had much, much thicker, but it's a pretty good thickness. The blade feels confidence-inspiring. It's robust enough that I don't feel worried about this knife for pretty much any reasonable task I do with it. The Tanto is nice in terms of how it pierces and all of that. Although I will say, the very tip on this, I don't know how easy it'll be to see, but let me see if I can get this to focus. It just doesn't have the most like pointy, precise tip I've ever seen. I feel like that's more so like a sharpening thing from the factory, but it just almost seems like it just barely rounds over at the tip, and I would like to see that reasonably be fully pointed. But yeah, I mean, the edge that's on it is nice. It's very sharp. The profile of the blade does well for cutting. You've got a nice flat, and then you've got some belly to work with up there, and it's functional. It's just not like special in terms of cutting, which at a certain point, like, how many knives can be special at cutting? You know, like, there's the TRM knives, which are really thin blade stock and very slicey, and like, I dig those for cutting. And then there's knives like the 80-20, which are like stupid thick, and like that's an adventure knife for me that I'll baton with. Like, and those are like polar opposite ends, but are like kind of special in their own ways. And like, this just kind of rides the middle, where most knives do. But it does it well. Like, there's no flaws with this blade. The cutting performance has been totally good for everything that I've asked of it. It's done it well, and I haven't had any complaints. So I think, I know a lot of the people who've kind of found this knife are really excited about it, and I get that. I understand why there's a lot of excitement behind it, and I understand, like, the friends of mine who keep raving about it. I agree with them on just about everything that they're saying about it that makes it good. And I think part of the excitement sometimes can be like finding the new thing that was under the radar and realizing it's good, and that's absolutely fair. But for me, there's just those couple of little things that, like, I'm not going to go buy one of these for myself after borrowing this one from Brandon. I really liked it. I've enjoyed carrying it. It's been an objectively good knife. If anyone asked me, is this knife a good value for the money? Yeah. The materials, the fit and finish, like the way it's put together, all of this, it's a good knife for the money. It fits my hand fairly well. There's a lot that's good to say about it. But I don't like the edges of the micarta so much. They're not the worst, but like if I had one of these, I'd feel like I would need to sand it down. And I don't like buying knives necessarily that I feel like I need to do things to make them right. It's one thing to mod a knife for fun, but it's another to like, I have to fix this thing that I kind of perceive to be an issue with it for it to be right for me. That's not my favorite. I also don't like that the clip doesn't come all the way. Like, that's a little thing, but it's a thing, you know? And other than that, there's not really like issues with the knife for me. But I also don't feel like it's doing anything that special either. When I compare it to all the other knives in my collection, once I'm done now carrying this, because I'm trying to get it reviewed and feel it out and like honor my process with it, if this was just a knife in my case next to Spyderco PM2s and my Koenig Arius and Finch knives and like a whole range of other knives, what would set this apart that would make me reach for it to put it in my pocket over all the others? And I don't know that I feel like there really is a thing that sets it apart. The new Vox F5.5, which is also a Voxnaes design, that's a knife that makes me feel something that I will pick over other knives in my collection, and I do own, and I don't plan to get rid of because I love that knife. Like there are just other knives that give me that spark, if you will, and so I like this a lot. But it's not like, it hasn't become a favorite for me. Like, I don't think this would make it into my top 10 list, but I see why it would for other people. And that's kind of the beauty of the hobby and getting your information from other sources, right? Because if you watch Brandon's video on this knife, Everyday Minimalist, he'll be linked down below. It's his knife. You'll probably see a different take on it because for him, it is a different knife than it is for me. And yeah, I think that's a good way for me to put it. I think I've kind of encapsulated it. I like it. I'm not in love with it, but I think it's good. It's recommendable, and I get why a lot of people really like it. And I'm glad I experienced it. I'm genuinely, like, no part of me, any time that I put this in my pocket, was like, oh, bummer, I have to carry the Katla again today so I can get ready for the review. Like, it's pleasant to carry, it's pleasant to use, it is a good knife. It's just not like, it doesn't stand out to me amongst the sea of other knives that are available. So, take that for what it's worth. I appreciate it, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Again, Everyday Minimalist will be linked down below. This has been the Viper Katla Vox design, and it's been a fun one. See you later.